Hey guys, Totallydubbed here, and today I'm doing a video review on the LG 34GK950F. Now this monitor, other than being a mouthful to say, is feature rich. It has a 34-inch curved panel that runs at QHD resolution. That is 3440 x 1440p. It has an IPS display that has a quoted response time of 5 milliseconds G to G and 1 milliseconds using MBR. It has an ultra-wide display, therefore it's running a 21:9 aspect ratio, and better still, it has 144 Hz out the box. No need to overclock it or factory overclock it, 144 Hz out the box at QHD. And to add the cherry on the cake, it has display VESA HDR 400 standard, so in other words, it's a HDR enabled monitor too. In other words, what does this monitor not do? And finally, it has AMD FreeSync 2 that is certified as well. And I'll get into that in just a bit, given that I've got an NVIDIA card and the NVIDIA update. I've been running G-Sync on it as well. So in terms of inputs and outputs, you've got two HDMI ports and one display port as well. You've also got two USB hubs at the round of the back of the monitor, making it a little bit awkward to plug and play your USB flash drives, but nevertheless they are included, and you've got a 3.5mm jack. Now you'll be wondering how much all of these specs cost. Well, it is expensive. It's a £1,100 monitor in the UK, whilst in the US it can be found for around $995. In the link in the description, links will be down in the description below, so be sure to check them out in case you're interested in buying them. Aside the specs, let's talk about the build quality and design. The monitor itself looks really nice. It's got a red accent with a red and black accent stand at the bottom and behind the monitor. It's made out of plastic but does hold up the monitor very well. The monitor can be height adjusted, which is pretty limited, but nevertheless has got height adjustment, and you've got tilt adjustment, and it can swivel as well within its own stand. As you can see, I'm just being a little bit careful in order not to hit the bookshelf speakers at the back. In terms of bezels, LG has done a fantastic job over here. All the way around you've pretty much got thin bezels. The largest bezel is at the bottom, and even then that's extremely small. The added curvature as well is fantastic because it adds a little bit of immersion. With an ultra-wide monitor you do want to have a little bit more immersion, so it's nice to see that curvature. And better still, there's no sort of a backlight bleed over the top backlight bleed on the side of the monitors either with that curvature. I'll get into the picture quality and backlight bleed test as well, but nevertheless I must say I'm very impressed with the build quality and design that LG has chosen. Now in terms of entering the OSD, there's a little joystick button at the middle of the monitor. Very easy to access and very easy to interact with. The OSD itself is very responsive, and I'm just going to show you this a little bit more detail. Now looking through the OSD, what I like is at the top you've got these 4 or 5 little presets that are there to indicate what is running. So you can see right now I've got AMD FreeSync off, HDR off, motion blur reduction also off, but I'm running 144 Hz and a fastest response time. Now you'll have to choose through the different modes in order to see what is best for you. However, in order to enable the response time setting, which you can see over here, you'll need to run on a Gamer 1 or Gamer 2 or one of the gaming orientated one. If I run it to sRGB, what you'll be able to see is that the response time is now blacked out, so I can't select it. So I'm just going to run back to Gamer 1. Now in terms of the game adjustment, you can enable or disable motion blur reduction. If you enable this, it does disable FreeSync and vice versa. The FreeSync option has extended and basic, and I tested mine on extended. You got black stabilization as well, that you can ramp up the black levels. Response time, you can see I've got to set it on faster. Crosshair placement if you want as well. Picture adjustment, you can adjust the brightness. Now right now I've got it on 25, but normally I use it at around 80%, and the only reason I've got it at 25 is for the camera to pick it up properly. Contrast at 70, sharpness 50, gamma mode 2, color temperature warm, because I found it was the best one. You can also put it to custom and play around with the RGB settings as well, and you can also let the monitor dynamically adjust that. In terms of inputs, you can select them over here, and you can also change the ratio directly from here. Then within the general tab, you've got all variety of different options. The most important one will be the DisplayPort version. You want to set that to 1.4. And then other than that, you've got the information about the display itself and the refresh rate and the resolution it's running at. I must say what LG have done over here is pretty comprehensive. No complaints whatsoever with the OSD. So let's talk about the display quality, that IPS panel. Now, out of the box, when I got it, I was actually very impressed. It doesn't need any calibration of sorts, and yes, you can play around with the OSD and figure out the best setting for you, but it is actually very impressive. Out the box, I was, not to say blown away, but extremely impressed by the level of accuracy that this LG monitor was able to achieve. Now, flicking through just a few pictures, for example, what I found is that the monitor was able to respond pretty well in terms of giving you a great contrast ratio, a good sort of depth, and also in terms of the overall color vibrancy, it was actually very impressive. There was nothing that I felt was overly missing. It didn't feel like I was looking at a washed out screen or a screen that was severely hampered in terms of its color accuracy. So I then put it across a calibrator to see how it would do, and I was actually pleasantly surprised to see this monitor is among one of the most accurate displays I've actually come across in terms of gaming displays. It has an average delta of 1.25, which is really, really low. The closer to 1 essentially, or the closer to 0 should I say, it's the best result that you can get. And you can see across the board it does a really good job. Most monitors would actually kind of struggle. Its contrast ratio doesn't compare with MVA panels at 966:1, but as I said, looking at it with the naked eye, I didn't feel myself, oh, I'm lacking sort of a contrast ratio here. In terms of overall brightness, this has been certified by the display standard of 400 candela. Here it does hit just under that mark on SDR, and whilst ramping up to HDR, I actually found it to hit around 460 odd. So it was actually very impressive to see actually kind of doing better than what the actual specs are online, or at least what LG claims. So it actually does get bright enough to be used in a sunlit room, and in terms of its HDR standards, it allows you to get a little bit brighter than you normally would expect. Of course, it's not going to compete with full local array dimming displays, nor is it going to get to around 1000 nits or something like that. It's just up to around 400, so do bear that in mind. This does it does become quite important when it comes to the HDR. Now, in terms of display uniformity, I was also impressed. It's not perfect across the board. You'll see able to see on the top left-hand side, it kind of struggles with a -17% variance from the center point. So the brightness uniformity could be better, but again, for a gaming monitor, it's actually really impressive to see it relatively even throughout the board. Now, I should also mention that I did put it to the sRGB color standard to see how it would do, and it hits 92.2% of the sRGB gamut coverage and hits 94% of the gamut volume. You'll be able to see over here, just me bringing it a little bit closer so you guys can see. So again, very impressive results, and something that video and photo editors will be pleased to know about. No complaints there. Now, in terms of my overall opinions of the panel itself, in terms of just its SDR or even HDR performance, in terms of color accuracy, I must say I was very impressed. Again, out the box, didn't need any calibration of sorts, and of course you can calibrate it, get a better result, but non-calibrated out the factory, very impressive results from LG, and I must say top marks to LG, especially for an ultra-wide monitor. Not many monitors are able to do that in such a way. Now, in terms of backlight bleed, you'll be able to see here a little video. I turned off all the lights in my room and just tried to show the backlight bleed. It's an IPS display, it's going to have a bit of backlight bleed, but it's not over the top to the point that it's disturbing you when it comes to gaming or watching movies, or let's say you love playing Batman or whatever it might be. It's not going to affect you too badly. So as far as IPS monitors go, I must say I was very impressed and not overly concerned about how it does with its backlight bleed. Now in terms of HDR, this became quite interesting. So I enabled HDR through the display options on Windows, and then I launched up Destiny 2, which is a HDR game, or has the capabilities, and I found that the colors looked just a little bit skewed, not really accurate to what I imagined to be. I even went through the OSD and played around with the OSD settings, and even then I still found myself just being a little bit disappointed at the way that the HDR signal was being passed through on this monitor. It just didn't look too right. It looked a little bit off, looked a bit weird. The vibrancy was kind of off, and no matter what setting I tried to play around with, the HDR didn't really pop out to me. Weirdly enough, when I put a 4K Blu-ray player to it and run a HDR signal, then it was absolutely fine. So I'm not sure if it's to do with Windows, with Destiny 2, with the monitor being picked up via DisplayPort, God knows, but all I can say is that it does do HDR, but HDR wasn't something that I was really sold upon when using this monitor, unless you want to use a 4K Blu-ray player and run it, you know, at a lower resolution or a lower frame rate, for example, then it's absolutely fine. But anyway, it does support HDR, and it does work, but not something I would overly shout about. So now let's talk about a gaming performance, and you're able to see in the background that I was playing Destiny 2, and I must say in Destiny 2 this monitor was perfect for casual gaming, and even though I was playing the competitive playlist, it is a very responsive monitor, and no matter what I threw at it, it was able to respond. Better still, NVIDIA G-Sync actually worked through the monitor, and even though I did the pendulum demo and tried to see if there was any artifacts, G-Sync essentially worked through this monitor and didn't give me any negative sort of feel to it. It actually responded very well, and therefore I had tear-free gaming with my GTX 1080. Of course, if you have got AMD graphics card, you can use AMD FreeSync 2 as well with the HDR capabilities. Again, AMD FreeSync and NVIDIA G-Sync both worked, and in this case I was able to test the G-Sync capabilities, which I think will be more interesting to most people because they'll wonder, does it actually work via this NVIDIA's new update? So yes, it does work, and no, I didn't have any problems. I ran the FreeSync option through the monitor's OSD. Then once doing that and enabling HDR through the display settings as well, I went into Destiny 2, so then I enabled HDR, and I had G-Sync enabled as well through the NVIDIA control panel, and ultimately had HDR G-Sync running at 1440p and 144 Hz. So yes, it does it pretty flawlessly. When I say pretty flawlessly, I didn't experience any problems, but obviously your mileage may vary depending on your setup and your graphics card, but I didn't have any problems. Now, in terms of more competitive games, such as Counter-Strike, like you can see in front of you now, I must say, again, I was very impressed. I was very much surprised to see this monitor respond very well and have very little inverse ghosting occurring, even at the fastest mode through the OSD. So going through the OSD over here, camera might not pick it up, but it's on the faster setting. And I must say, I barely noticed any sort of inverse ghosting, and yet the monitor responded very, very well. At the point that I would actually use this for competitive gaming, I wouldn't have any problems doing that. So I must say, very impressive to see a IPS panel like this LG, and especially in an ultra-wide format, to run 144 Hz, be very responsive, have HDR as well. So in terms of gaming, I had no complaints whatsoever. There is one thing that I would like to mention, and that's that MBR. So now MBR is essentially the motion blur which can be reduced. Now this will disable FreeSync, but what you will notice, and on the camera starts flickering and you see the whole screen kind of flickering, is the fact there was kind of like whining noise that was able to be heard underneath. So what you'll see now is a video of me showcasing that. And so you were able to say that there's a small little buzzing sound. I'm not really sure why that's the case, but nevertheless that happens and I could notice it. But with headphones on, you're not going to notice that small little sound. It's very faint but noticeable if you're in a quiet room and you're just, like, let's say working rather than gaming and shooting in games, and you won't notice it if there's any sort of sound that's going around you. But just bear that in mind, something I did notice. And now this brings me on to my conclusion. What do I think about this ultra-wide monitor? Well, to be honest, its biggest competitor, at least in my eyes, was the AOC AG493UCX Black Edition. That was a 1440p 120Hz MVA panel that now can be found for around £750 odd. That makes it a lot cheaper than this LG monitor, but this LG monitor boasts 144Hz. It's not capped at 120Hz. It also has a picture perfect, color accurate IPS display, unlike the MVA, and yet it responds fantastically in competitive gaming and casual gaming. And throw in the fact that it has NVIDIA G-Sync and AMD FreeSync running flawlessly on it, and it's got HDR, means that this monitor is arguably the best ultra-wide monitor you can find on the market. And I know I said that about the AOC, and I still agree with that, especially if you're on a little bit more of a budget. But if you can stretch that budget, this monitor should be your go-to gaming monitor. It does everything very well, and even in terms of photo, video editing, color grading, you'll be still very impressed with this monitor and also its ability to game. So that's pretty much it, guys. I thoroughly recommend it, and I can't stress it enough. It's not a monitor that I would normally say, yes, go out and buy, but this monitor really does tick out all the boxes. Let me know in the comments below what you think about it, or if you've got it. I'll be very much intrigued to know your experiences with it. So there we go, guys. I've been Totally Dubbed. If you like this review, make sure you give it a like, subscribe if you want to see more, favorite and share if you want to help the channel grow. And I'd also like to thank LG for reaching out and sending me this monitor for a review sample. It's going to go back, but nevertheless, it was nice to play around with it and review it. Alright guys, I've been Totally Dubbed. Take care and bye bye.